Greetings, M squared, and we are going to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. You've got to memorize the quadratic formula. It is the easiest all-purpose way to solve quadratic equations. It works every single time. There's no way, no equation where it wouldn't work. So you've got to know the formula, and I like to sing the song, so here it goes. Songs help you memorize things. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Sing that to yourself like 20 times. So I said all over. I need to extend that a little bit. Okay. You must have your quadratic equation in standard form. This is not in standard form because I have a 21 on the opposite side. So I need to subtract 21 from both sides. Standard form means I have the quadratic term first, then I have the linear term, then I have the constant. And when it's in standard form, then I can find my A, my B, and my C. Otherwise, if I said 21 was C, that would be wrong because C is negative 21. So my A is the coefficient of the quadratic term, that number that sits in front of x squared. B is the coefficient on the linear term, the number in front of the x. And C is the constant, the number that's all by itself without a variable. Once I have my A, B, and C, then I can sing my song. I'm going to solve for x. I'm going to find the values of x that make this equation true. That when I put that number in for x, I get a 0. X, I square it, multiply it by 2, subtract it, and then subtract 21. So, x equals negative b. That means the opposite of b. So if b is negative, it's going to turn it to positive. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, putting it in parentheses so I can square it, minus 4ac all over 2a. And then I go about to simplifying. So a negative 1 is obviously 1. I've got a plus or minus. That just tells me there's two x-intercepts. So one time when I solve it, I'm going to use the positive value of whatever this is. The next time I'll use the negative value. It's just a shortcut so we don't have to write the 1 plus that whole thing and then come back later and write the 1 minus. So it's just a shortcut we use in math. So negative 1 squared is 1. And then I have a negative and a negative. So that's going to get me a positive. So now I have an 8 times a 21. Well, 1 times 8, 2 times 8, I think that's going to be 168. And I'm going to divide it by 2 times 2, which is 4. Okay, so now I simplify this a little bit more. 1 plus or minus the square root of 169 over 4. The square root of 169 is 13. So now I have 1 plus or minus 13 over 4. And now I find the answers. So I have 1 plus 13 over 4, and then the next time I use my negative, 1 minus 13 over 4. Well, 1 plus 13 is 14, so 14 fourths reduces to 7 halves, or 3.5, and 1 minus 13 is negative 12, and that reduces to negative 3. So my x-intercepts, or solutions to this equation, are 3.5, or 7 halves, and negative 3. Okay, this one is missing a linear term. That just means b is going to be 0. It's already in standard form, I can tell, because the x squared's first, then the constant, and then I've got a 0 here. So I know my a is 4, and my b is 0, and my c is negative 11. When b is not there, it's 0. X equals negative b, there's no negative of 0, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I'm just plugging the a, b, and c into my formula. Okay, 0 squared, that's pretty easy. That's a 0. So I have 0 plus or minus the square root of, and two negatives again are going to make a positive. So 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 11. Now the 11 trick is you split the 16 apart, and you add the 1 in this. Here, 16 times 11, you split it apart, and then you add them. So it's 176. Over 8. So really I have plus or minus the square root of 176 over 8, and that is going to require a calculator. So let me get my calculator, which I should have prepared for but wasn't. Okay, here's my calculator. So I'm going to take the square root of 176 I'm going to end my parenthesis there. If you forget to end your parenthesis on this type of calculator, then it divides it by 8 before it takes the square root. So be careful with that. We want to make sure that we are dividing the square root of 176 by 8. Divided by 8, and I get 1.6583. So you have to, what are we going to round to? Let's round to the nearest hundredths. So that would be a 6, because the 8 tells me to move the 65 up to a 66. And that's an approximately equal to. But I also have the negative version. Since there's no b, I don't have to add or anything, so it's really just plus or minus that. Some people write it like this. Some people don't like to write it like this, and they'll write 1.66 and negative 1.66. It doesn't matter. Okay, that is solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Remember, you have to memorize that thing, and it can always be used to solve a quadratic equation. It doesn't mean that there will always be x-intercepts, but it can always be used. Good luck. M squared signing out.